Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into how a completely mundane dispute over regular household items snowballed into arguably one of the most profound philosophical debates in human history. We are talking about the fundamental right to govern.
Paper, tea, glass, and yep, even a simple deck of playing cards. Now, what's really fascinating about this list is just how ordinary it is, right? You might be wondering, why on earth would taxing such run-of-the-mill everyday items trigger one of the most explosive disputes in American history? Well, to figure that out, we've got to dig into the history.
Section 1. The Cost of Empire.
To find the real root cause of this massive conflict, we actually have to travel back a bit to the year 1763. This is right at the end of the French and Indian War. Britain had just won, and they gained this massive amount of new territory in North America. But, as you can probably guess, victory came at a pretty steep price. Imagine those heavy, leather-bound ledgers of the 18th century, absolutely overflowing with red ink. Britain was left sitting on a monumental mountain of war debt. The war was over, sure, but the bills, they were just coming due.
So how exactly did Britain plan to handle this financial mess? Well, their imperial ledger basically had three main priorities. First, pay off that massive war debt. Second, station defensive troops in North America. And third, protect all that newly expanded colonial land. Now, looking at this impartially from the British government's perspective, this was a highly logical stance. It makes sense. They had incurred this massive debt largely while defending the colonies. So, in their minds, it was entirely reasonable for the colonists to step up and help cover some of the ongoing costs.
Which brings us to Section 2, a wave of new taxes.
To solve those pressing financial woes we just talked about, Parliament decided to try and generate revenue directly from the colonies. And honestly, this perfectly illustrates the compounding frustration the colonists felt. Parliament didn't just pass one law and wait to see what happened. No, they rapidly fired off a whole series of them. In 1764, the Sugar Act taxed sugar and molasses. Just a year later, the Stamp Act of 1765 required colonists to pay for a special stamp on basically all printed materials. We're talking everything from legal documents right down to those playing cards we mentioned earlier. Then, bam, in 1767, the Townshend Acts slapped taxes on imported goods like glass, paper, paint, and tea.
But here is a really surprising historical fact that so often gets overlooked. The actual financial burden of these colonial taxes, it was actually relatively small, especially when you compare it to the heavy taxes that everyday citizens were paying back in Britain at the exact same time. So, if the taxes weren't actually bankrupting the colonists, why the absolute outrage? I mean, why was everyone so incredibly angry?
Section 3. The Fight for Representation.
This is where the narrative really pivots. You see, the colonial anger wasn't actually about the money itself. It was about the underlying power dynamic. It was about who had the authority to demand that money in the first place. By definition, Parliament was the British legislative body where decisions about taxes were approved by elected representatives. But here is the catch, and it's a big one. American colonists had absolutely zero elected members sitting in that room. Zero. When laws affecting their daily lives were passed, the colonists had no direct input whatsoever.
As you can imagine, this created two completely incompatible viewpoints. On one hand, Parliament argued for a concept of broad representation. Basically, they felt they represented the best interests of the entire British Empire, regardless of who directly elected them. Colonial leaders, on the other hand, while they strictly demanded local consent, they argued that only their own local assemblies, the people they had actually gone out and voted for, had the legitimate right to approve taxes on them. And this exact ideological clash birthed one of the most unforgettable slogans in history: no taxation without representation. It wasn't just a catchy phrase to yell in the town square either. It perfectly captured the core of their philosophical objection. They weren't protesting losing a few cents on a piece of paper. They were protesting a system that fundamentally denied them a voice.
Section 4. Organized colonial resistance. Now, this philosophical dispute didn't just stay as a polite debate on parchment paper. Oh no, it quickly moved to organized, systematic pushback on the ground. Step 1, hit them right in the wallet. Many colonists flat out refused to buy tax items, organizing widespread boycotts of British goods. Step 2, mobilize the public. Groups like the Sons of Liberty formed to organize protests. And Step 3, apply direct pressure. In many cases, royally appointed tax collectors faced intense public intimidation, basically pressuring them to resign their posts entirely.
Section 5. The simmering breaking point.
Eventually, all of this mounting economic and public pressure forced the British government to reconsider its strategy.
The Townshend Acts had ignited fierce resistance back in 1767, right? Well, by 1770, feeling the intense economic heat from all those boycotts, Britain actually backed down. They repealed most of the Townshend taxes. But, and this is a huge but, post-1770, they strategically kept one specific tax in place, the tax on tea.
So why keep just the tea tax? Well, it was a symbolic assertion of authority. At this point, keeping the tea tax was no longer about raising enough money to pay off that mountain of war debt. No, it was a firm, undeniable statement from Parliament asserting its ultimate authority to tax and govern the colonies. It was essentially Britain drawing a line in the sand, looking across the Atlantic and saying, "We are still in charge here."
So, the key takeaway from this explainer is that this whole ordeal was never just about a few pennies on a cup of tea. It leaves us with a massive, unresolved tension. Who truly has the right to govern, and who gets a voice in that decision? Think about it. When the law is made an ocean away by people you never elected, do you really have an obligation to obey it? It is a profound question, and leaving it unanswered set the stage perfectly for a very famous, very turbulent Tea Party in Boston Harbor. But that is an explainer for another time. Thanks for joining me today, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.